And so then to finish up then with chapter 6 of Heidegger's Being and Time, this is the section in which he introduces his theory of truth as aletheia. And I believe this is the first time in his writing that he introduces the concept of aletheia. And first what he talks about here in section 44, Dasein, disclosedness, and truth, which is then subdivided into 3 different sections. One is the traditional conception of truth, which gives a kind of outline or analysis of the traditional conception of truth. So along with the idea of reality, in the previous section we saw his criticism of reality as this realm of self-subsistent things that are in the mode of Vorhandenheit, in the mode of presence at hand, and what was wrong with that, why it was ontologically inadequate for Dasein. But along with that, the theory of reality that went from Plato and Aristotle down to Husserl also went along with it a theory of truth, and it was the so-called correspondence theory of truth, in which truth is about the agreement of knowledge with things. In Plato, I think what we have, the assumption is that there is this realm of truths that are waiting to be discovered by the mind. The mind arrives on the scene, and in the case of Plato, uncovers the Platonic forms. So in a way, truth is out there for Plato. It's ontologically out there, the realm of the forms. And the forms are there, and they're waiting for the individual mind to come along and learn about them and conform to them. With Kant, it's the opposite. The forms are in the mind, the concepts are in the mind, the ideas are in the mind, and the outer world of things now has to conform to the mind, to the ideas and truths that the human mind brings with it to experience. The outer world now is forced to conform to the mind, whereas with Plato, it was the mind that had to conform to the outer world. But in either case, it's still a correspondence theory, the old adequatio theory of truth, which is the adequatio of intellectus ad rem, the correspondence between the subject and the object. So it's still a mode of presence at hand, because you have a knower, a subject, who is trying to know the world in its objective state, and it's waiting to be known. And truth is a matter then of correspondence. And so Heidegger critiques this by saying that part of the problem with that is that words themselves in assertions are in the presence at hand mode, and when an assertion is made, it uncovers a certain chunk of reality and lifts it out of its ready-to-handness, or whatever being mode it happens to be in, and puts it into the being mode of presence at hand. So if I say that the picture on the wall is hanging askew, now with my assertion I have pulled it out of its ready-to-hand mode and turned it into a theoretical mode. Now I've ripped that chunk of reality out into a presence-at-hand mode, and I've cast myself simultaneously in the role of a pure subject beholding a pure object, in which the subject is outside of the world, standing outside of the world, not necessarily involved in it or with it. And so truth, as adequatio, the assertions are constantly de-worlding chunks of reality and putting them into the presence-at-hand mode, the mode of pure theoretical cognition, which Heidegger is trying to get around, and that's what he's been trying to do all along. So what he does is he says that with his theory of truth as uncoveredness now, which is aletheia, truth as being uncovered, if I make a statement and I say in the assertion that the picture across the room is hanging askew on the wall, what the assertion does, properly speaking, is that it reveals the being of the picture in a certain way, that it characterizes the mode of being of the picture in a certain way. And in doing that, it unconceals aspects of the picture. It pulls it out of its hiddenness, its mode of concealment, and makes manifest certain aspects of it that have nothing to do with truth and falsity. Truth and falsity is here being tossed onto the scrap heap of the metaphysical age, and with Heidegger's theory here of truth as a being uncovered, we're beginning to get the weakening of truth into the soft ontologies of Gianni Vattimo, who comes along later and draws this line. This is the beginning of the weakening of truth, and the beginnings of the end of the metaphysical age and its age of absolute certainties, of certain forms of knowledge, absolute subjects beholding absolute objects, that there is a valid objective truth to be known. That isn't the case any longer in Heidegger, because what truth does now, in its mode of unhiddenness, of unconcealing things, is that truth now is a quest for disclosure of hitherto hidden realms of reality. So assertions are like little tools that are always being used as depth probes to be sent out into reality and to light them up with flashes. that just simply light them up, almost like flashbulbs. And we suddenly see this hidden, concealed aspect of reality. It becomes evident to us. And even if the statement happens to be false, it can still illuminate hitherto obscured aspects of reality. So the truth and falsity paradigm is gone now. And now it's all about uncovering certain facets of reality. Heidegger doesn't yet have the idea here of the clearing. This isn't aletheia as unconcealment in the clearing in which certain aspects of entities unconceal themselves and simultaneously conceal other facets of themselves. For every side that an entity shows us, it withdraws the other side away from us. That's later in the paper on the essence of truth. So he's not yet going into the dynamics of aletheia yet. Just the idea of truth is about uncovering entities, because his whole basis here of his whole fundamental ontology is that being has been forgotten by beings. It's been covered up by the history of philosophy ever since Parmenides, who was the first to discover it, and then with Plato, who began to cover it up, and it's been covered up with an ontical emphasis on beings rather than an ontological emphasis on being. Being has been covered up. So this theory of truth as digging up being is essential to his whole ontology, and it's almost an inevitability that it would have a theory of truth as uncovering when everything that he's trying to do, even with the idea of Abbau, the destruction that he's trying to do, where with a destruction that later becomes Derrida's deconstruction, you're trying to clear out bad ideas, cliches, commonplace observations. You're trying to clear all of that out to find fresh or original ideas, but you're uncovering them, you're unconcealing them. It's like you're digging them up out of the ground, and it's almost like archaeology. It's like you're finding civilizations that have been forgotten and covered up by vines and creepers, and you have to dig them up and pull them out into the light of day and see that there were these older conceptions of being once. Parmenides, Heraclitus, the pre-Socratics and their idea of phusis and aletheia has been forgotten and occluded by the emphasis of being as something transcendent, something abstract, something purely Vorhandenheit. All of that has covered up and occluded and hidden the history of being, which now for Heidegger is in the mode of being uncovered, being unconcealed, brought out into the light. All of his metaphors are drawn from forests and from ruins and digging up ruins. That all of that imagery is buried as deep structures within the verbiage of Heidegger's theory of truth. So it's a really fascinating theory of truth here. Other ways in which things become hidden, in which ideas or things become inauthentic, is of course the they. The inauthenticity of the they through idle talk and curiosity and ambiguity also have the effect of covering up things, covering them up, putting them into an inauthentic mode. And so the real philosopher who's in search of an authentic life has to dig them back up, has to dig them out from what the crowd has covered over, dig them back up and present them as something fresh that need to be re-understood if it's been forgotten, or if it's a totally new idea, something fresh and novel that's introduced as a singularity. I think the emphasis on Heidegger, though, is not novelty, as it is for Badiou. The emphasis on Heidegger is on finding something that was once known, but has since become forgotten and covered up, but now he's bringing it back, because what he's doing is essentially going back to the pre-Socratics and bringing back their theory of truth, which he believes has been forgotten and covered up. For Badiou, the idea is the event as singularity. The event as singularity puts emphasis on novelty. But it should be pointed out, too, and this is a point I forgot to mention when we were talking earlier about Heidegger's theory of the subject, is that Heidegger's theory of the subject forms in his authenticity by differentiating himself from the they, and using philosophy to uncover things. But with Badiou, the subject precisely becomes part of a collectivity. Badiou doesn't have this idea that the subject that the subject emerges by distinguishing himself from a crowd, because for him the creation of the subject is based upon the subject's following of a truth event. The subject has to remain faithful and become faithful to a truth event, whether it's the French Revolution, the truth event of Haydn's classical music, the truth event of Einsteinian physics, and he becomes part of a collectivity through that fidelity to the truth event that subjectivizes him. But note that it also puts him into the mode of a they, a member of a crowd. So Badiou's theory swallows up the individual into the they, and you lose the whole point of Heidegger's idea that authenticity is found precisely by uncovering the mode of the vines and creepers that have covered up. the authentic thing, the authenticity of what truth once was and can be again here. And it's not an exact science. There is no right or wrong understanding of truth here. It's not a matter of solving a mathematical problem to which we have it, there's either a right or a wrong answer. Philosophy doesn't work that way anyway, and anyone who thinks that it does is operating out of an old, outdated correspondence theory of truth that simply doesn't apply anymore. It's a matter of degree. Unhiddenness is a matter of the degree of coming out into the light. There are degrees of light and darkness, shades and gradations here, and Heidegger's trying to introduce all this subtlety and complexity about the knowing process into his philosophy here, and that's what this is all about. So we end the first half of the book of Being in Time, the preparatory analysis of Dasein, with a discussion of truth, and that brings us to an end of the first half of the book, and in the second half of the book he'll begin to move into a discussion of time proper with the problem first that is raised by death.